morning. This is Dean Cantu, the host of the Future Insight podcast. We are very fortunate today to have as our guest Dr. Cynthia Bice, who is the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Dean of the Graduate Studies at Missouri Valley College. So welcome, Dr. Bice, to Future Insight.
Good morning.
Great to have you here. Got some areas that we want to talk about over the course of the podcast, but the first thing is, though, we always afford our guests an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about your professional journey. I mentioned your current position, but you have a tremendous breadth of experiences in a variety of different positions, teaching as well as administrative positions. So if you could kind of share with us your professional journey that got you to this point where you currently serve here in this position at Missouri Valley College.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Well, it kind of all starts at the beginning. I was blessed with two parents who definitely valued education, and they were first generation college, and so therefore I was blessed to be second generation. But it was never a question of if I was going to go to college, but where. And, it starts there. I had both parents were educators. And so I saw and lived school from not just a student perspective, but from the daughter of two educators and one, my father was an administrator. And that was a great influence, probably more than I even knew about it at that point in time, because I can remember having dreams about, wanting to be a photographer and a photojournalist, which I was for a while. That was actually my first major.
That's great.
And then I wanted to just travel the world, which I did. I worked for the airlines for a while, but I finally got my feet on solid ground and went back to school and got my first degree in elementary ed. And that's kind of what started my journey into my own career in education. I, quickly kind of came through the ranks because I really had an interest in helping people to understand what their options were in life. So while I loved the classroom, I also had a desire, probably in high school, that I thought I might be, a good counselor, because everybody always came to me with their problems. So I right away went into master's work in counseling, both in professional and school, and I did that. And then it wasn't long that I realized, as a counselor, I was still having to make so many decisions administratively in the public school district that I was in. And I served really as an assistant principal more than anything. And I was like, well, might as well keep going to school. So I did, and got the degree in executive educational leadership, which was up to the superintendency level. And worked with some really, really great people, had so many wonderful mentors and influences throughout my entire career. And, I've always just had a real philosophy that I need to be open to wherever I'm sent, and I, make the place better than I found it. And a lot of these things were just taught to me by my parents. And so doors have just opened, and then, it's hard for me to go. In fact, one of my core characteristics is loyalty and longevity. And so I've really, had a hard time leaving a place to go to another place. I've even been, repentant to my boss and taken pies, and I'm so sorry, but I've got this other opportunity. That's been a really hard thing for me throughout my life, because I would have stayed at the very first job I ever had I been, able to do that, I guess. But doors would just open, and I would be, interested and intrigued. And that's how basically I'm where I'm at, because I am blessed that I have never left a place in a bad situation. I've never burnt bridges, and I've always been so sorry to have to leave wherever I've been. So I've had really, really great experiences at every single step of the way of my career, and I've truly been blessed.
That's great. Well, in your CV illustrates the fact that, as you mentioned, that you always go into situations and wanting to make it better than when you entered, and as you go on to the next opportunity, and that's very apparent. Also, your thirst for education is also evident in your CV. I know one of the one of the opportunities that you took advantage of is a postdoctoral certificate at Yale, and you had the opportunity there to get to know Dr. James Comer, and you were there, and the focus of that was on school development and community partnerships. And I know those experiences, as we all say, serve to guide and inform us going forward. So, what was your takeaway, and how did you apply what you learned there to the positions that you've held?
Well, it was just so overwhelming to be at Yale University for the time that I was there. It was just such a treat, and I treasure that time so much with the many people that I met and the colleagues that I still have to this day from that experience. And the reason that I was afforded that experience was I was at Drury University at the time as a professor, and they were initiating a partnership with Yale and Dr. Comer. And so one of the applications of all of that training was that the students, the education students in the Drury program, were partnered with host teachers at the Springfield city schools, Springfield, Missouri. A lot of people don't think of Springfield as a city, but it actually is considered and defined as an urban school district. They were really having a hard time with revolving doors of teachers. They did not want to be in the inner Springfield city schools. And so Drury, through this partnership and what they were learning, they were able to, with Yale, they were able to speak to the leaders at the Springfield district and say, hey, look, we want to help this situation to the end of student, achievement. And so our students would go to the host teachers at the Springfield schools, but the Springfield teachers would also be afforded a trip also to Yale to a week-long series of workshops, a week-long experience, so that they would have all kinds of development in best practices, high-impact practices in the classroom in every discipline. It was just an amazing experience. But the caveat would be that trip was paid for, but then they would have to take one of our Drury teachers as an intern, and then also the Springfield district. And they didn't have to give a guarantee to hire our people, but they absolutely needed to give our student teachers an interview. And then it kind of was cyclical. Then those teachers would get interviewed. The caveat with those teachers is they would have to stay in that school for a period of 5 years. The reason being that they would see growth in achievement because of the consistency of the same teacher, being available to the students and just giving some stability to those schools. And so that was very interesting work. And from that, I continued to apply that. It just seemed like the dots connected. The move to Lindenwood University, then at that point in time, we were looking at so many more school districts, in the St. Louis area. So there's, many dozens of districts. And we were approached by Emerson Electric, Emerson now, to create some kind of longevity because they just felt like they were losing particular opportunities to draw people into their company to work. They're in the Jennings-Ferguson Florissant School District. And so while I was at Lindenwood, there was already a Grow Your Own program in the Fort Zumwalt School District. And I started looking at how that was operating and then thinking, I think we could probably apply some of the concepts that we did in Springfield to some of the things this Grow Your Own program is doing for student teachers, and come up with a program that really would be unique and very valuable in that area of Ferguson Florissant. Unbeknownst to me, the whole Ferguson Florissant thing with Michael Brown came up and blew up, and all of this happened before that. So it was a very valuable thing to have this piece there that was, we were already working to keep good students in the Jennings and Ferguson area, starting to maybe train them up in future teacher organizations and clubs in the high schools. giving them some pieces of internship experience, even as a high school student, offering them dual credit to get those first class, the first class or first classes of a teacher education program. They were being assigned mentors, and basically combining, because that was a future teachers in Fort Zumwalt, that's what they were doing, and combining that with what the work what had been done at Springfield, and turning that into a cyclical program. We obtained the grant. Emerson loved the idea, and we were able to really do some great work with training future teachers, but also lifting up, the veteran teachers and creating a cyclical effect there as well. And it was great. It was, those teachers, we would invite them in for a poster session. It was almost like a reverse job fair, but we would invite in the superintendents and the principals, and they would present, because we would give them, they had to do an action research project while they were in this program. That was the requirement of them getting their tuition paid for. And the principals and superintendents could see exactly, how they had actually impacted students in their own school districts. And what we did, we included Jennings and Ferguson Florissant in that program. So that was just amazing. And I was so happy and pleased with how that turned out. And the part about the Francis Howe work that was in play there was, I learned how impactful it is to just really make sure that you have a theme in a district, that you can truly change a culture. It was under the superintendency of Pam Sloan. She was just such a mentor over time, and I ended up serving in the school board there for about 6 years. But she partnered with Lindenwood, and through the work there, we wrote some white papers just about, because we did the same thing. And that was the other piece of the Ferguson Florissant, where they wanted to make sure that their new teachers, it was all about teacher induction programs, and they wanted to make sure the new teachers really understood best practices and so on and so forth. So we created a program to where they would hire the adjunct teachers, but instead of it just being a regular induction where the teachers have to go to a meeting and they're checking a box, it actually was turned into a graduate course, and the tuition was paid for. But through these graduate courses that all of their new teachers were required to do because of the state induction piece, they were able to really soak up some great instructional practices and just philosophies on education from the whole DeFore, philosophy and the resources that the DeFore group would give to that school district. So that was another really influential piece on me when we were creating the Ferguson Florissant Jennings under the Emerson grant. So it just seemed like everything kept coming together, and so it's easy to think, each other. Yeah, everything built together, the dots connected.
That's great. And I know your work with Francis Howe, you talked a little bit about, if you could kind of share with listeners, some of what you did was guided by your dissertation. And some of it was, the mentorship that you received from Dr. Joyce Epstein, using the keys to parent involvement. You could kind of unpack that a little bit and share how that served to help inform you.
Sure. So my dissertation was on practical parenting partnerships, and it was at the time a pilot grant program with the Danforth Foundation in the state of Missouri. And my study, my first job as a counselor, the principal wanted me to oversee that. They had obtained the grant already, but they needed a director, and they asked me to be the director because the principal had written the grant. And I said, but I'm not a parent. I'll never forget this. And she goes, well, you were a kid, weren't you? And I was like, yeah, because I was just such a young educator at the time. So I took that on and learned, again, so much. Learned how to hopefully be a halfway decent parent, but, learned just the whole thing about, marketing. How do you get parents there? The student involvement, parent involvement piece. And that was just so valuable to me at the time. So then when I decided to apply for the doctoral program, that ended up being my topic, right? And so part of that piece was just there wasn't a whole lot of research on it, and so I was reaching out for all of the resources to actually write my dissertation, and it kept falling back on Joyce Epstein and James Comer. Now, mind you, this was before I was a professor at Drury, so because of my dissertation, I was very familiar with James Comer, not even knowing that they were doing a whole partnership with them prior to working there. And then was afforded the opportunity to meet Joyce Epstein. In fact, I would say I was her lady in waiting, because through the Drury University experience, we would invite her to our conferences that we would have in that Yale partnership program, and I got to drive her around. So that was amazing.
Some of the ways that you have helped to lead and been part of teams that have been incredibly innovative. So I can really see that you are a leader that embraces innovation, and you see the potential that it has. If you could talk, one of the most recent ones, you talked about development of warehouses into a new experiential immersive lab learning space, or spaces. Again, you share with our listeners what that entails and what your objective is there.
Sure. So that was a time in my life that I was just kind of seeing what was out there, and I had a handful of opportunities, and I was led to this opportunity in Miami because during the interview, the president of the campus said, she took me to this empty warehouse and said, should you choose to come here, you're going to be part of the brain trust to develop whatever this is going to be. And that's exactly what happened. What she promised was exactly what happened. And I chose that job because the other places kind of wanted me to fix them. And I was like, oh, this blank slate is exciting. So we were so fortunate to have brilliant minds at that college, and people who already were very good at creating partnerships and really thinking about innovation. But in particular, I just have to give honor and praise to this campus president, because she, like me, just understood that there really needed to be places for students to experience what it was like to be actually in a workplace. And I was heavily influenced at the time also by my own daughter, who had recently gone through an internship with Microsoft. And so, I just saw what experiences she had. And I thought, we've got to make sure that students who come here, no matter what their interest and career path, that when they are leaving here, that their employers see them as people who aren't just a first year employee, but like, hey, it seems like they've been in this job for 2 or 3 years because of the experiences that we were giving them at that campus. And this was so beautiful because, again, it was before the pandemic. It wasn't as a response to the pandemic. We created this whole plan of what this space was going to look like, and it was undergoing construction before the pandemic and throughout the pandemic, ready to be opened right as people were opening up their campuses after that horrid time. And people were like, oh, this is so amazing, did you think of this during the pandemic? It's like, no, this is actually construction. It took a couple of years. But when it opened up, we were the campus that all the faculty wanted to go to our campus, the students wanted to come to our campus, because when you walked in, it was more like walking into a Google workplace or Microsoft, where bright colors, glass walls, you could see all of these different lab opportunities, whether it was the makerspace or the creative content, which was for podcasts and green screens and things like that, sound booths, and of course the Tesla lab, tech place. It was just so inviting, and so it was open, and it was like going almost to a science museum, a very active, really cool science museum where pick your spot and that's where you're going to go. And it was just phenomenal because of the team I was on, and that I was actually put in a place of being a primary leader in the thoughts and the ideas. I would send the president pictures of things that I thought would really be cool to be in there. She was so cool because she just would take them. She wouldn't say anything. She hid it from us. And so we didn't even see the the process of the construction. And then when we got a private tour right before it was ready to open, one of the key things that I'd sent her was kind of these monumental stairs, and it was like a stairway, but then it was almost like, if you imagine listening to Plato or Aristotle, these big, huge stairways, steps that people could sit on and gather on, and it had, screens where you could put like an aquarium screen or whatever, and then front screen. It was such an amazing space. I literally had tears in my eyes when I saw it, because she was just such an amazing leader, and I give all the credit to her, Beverly Moore Garcia, that she took our vision, she took our ideas, and then working with the contractors, she put those things to life. And to this day, it's an amazing place. It's really, 21st century a learning engagement. And students, even during the pandemic, when everything was remote, they were still coming there because you could see all of them have their laptops and their headphones on, but they wanted to gather together. The furniture was comfortable. The tables were conducive to engagement. They just have all these touch points everywhere. It's just an amazing space. And if you're ever in Miami, you really need to stop by there. What an influence in my life, and what a grand opportunity that was that President gave me to be a part of that. And I will forever be grateful. And it's very much an imprint in my life, even as I'm in my current job, when we're reimagining what the library needs to look like, and so on and so forth. So definitely an influence in my life.
Oh, I can see that. And it really does. I like your use of the term reimagining, because it really does seem like that's what you and the team, what you all did, was reimagine what that could be. So that's great. Another focus, as you know, of Future Insight is on that transition from high school to college and student success. And I know that you had an initiative that was focused on student retention. I believe it was called the Academy of Excellence. Could you talk a little bit about what that model that you implemented, what those elements or components were, and talk a little bit about what that yielded relative to student retention?
That was definitely a proof of concept, and those are kind of two different conversations that happen simultaneously: the early alerts and interventions, and then the Academy of Excellence. The Academy of Excellence idea came about because there were groups of students that were already getting into particular higher level scholarship programs at the college, but then not everybody made it. And so we were like, well, what is the missing piece of those students who they have the GPA, but they are just not making it through their application into this scholars program of whatever, scholars program it was. We had about 2 or 3 of them. And what can we do to kind of close the gap for those students? The other piece of that was the early alert and interventions program system that would be trying to gather and catch the students that were under a particular GPA, like the ones that were, 2.5 and kind of shaky, and we didn't want to lose them. And so we were already having those conversations again before the pandemic. And I hate to even talk about the pandemic, but it is kind of interesting how we were having those conversations prior to that. And so our work and preparation regarding these particular groups of students really panned out and paid off, because the pandemic did happen, and we were already training tutors and mentors and embedded tutors. We were already training our faculty and asking for volunteers, to take part in this, little pseudo experiment called early alerts and interventions, utilizing the tools of Canvas and so on and so forth, the learning management platforms, to catch these students early. So one example of the early alert program that we did was, really trying to get teachers to understand early diagnosis. Like, there's no reason if a student in English, because we know already if they don't pass English, that's a prerequisite for so many things. They're not going to do well. It's going to delay their education and so on and so forth. So there's no reason not to have a diagnostic, little writing exercise in the first week of class. And if you know that they're not ready for prime time, and, we had a lot of second language learners there, then then let's pull them and basically give them triage and then put them in a class that starts later, maybe just two weeks later, and kind of a credit recovery kind of a thing, thinking, and have a trained and willing professor that will sit with these students who are willingly, we're not forcing them to withdraw from that first section,
Right.
but willingly withdrawing and going into this second class with really, super intensive support through the instructor and whoever else would be involved in that. We had 100% pass rates with that, and doing that with those willing students that would withdraw, right? So why don't we actually do that? I mean, why do we just let them fail? Why do we know in the second week that they are not ready for this class? We need to do something now. And so it was really, I believe, some forward thinking, to be able to, because what we knew happened, and I saw it firsthand through my own nephew, is those students coming into college out of high school really had some gaps in their learning, especially in the literacy part of their learning, I would say. And because everybody was just, I'm not blaming anybody, but it was the pandemic. It was crazy times. So that was a piece of it. With the academy, we were able to capture students who had applied for these scholarship programs, didn't quite make it, and give them basically one-on-one culture of care. And I have to emphasize the term and the phrase culture of care, because they weren't connected. Part of what were the missing pieces of why they weren't getting into these scholars programs. Maybe it was because they hadn't done any service learning. Maybe it was they didn't have anything added above and beyond what their GPA said. And so we had a coordinator who was just like, their den mom, I mean, she called herself even the mama bear, where, she wasn't their actual advisor, but she kind of became an advisor and mentor of sorts. And we would have special events for them, whether it was learning how to market your brand or, and really, it might be other events going on in the campus. So it wasn't solely an event for them, but let's, think about the undergraduate research symposium. Were they students that typically would take part in that and do that? Probably not, through whatever reasons. And so we would get them connected, and we would help them with, taking part in that and participating. And their first term there, we would just make sure they showed up to that event so they could actually see what it was. And then we would take them aside and say, hey, look. And we also made sure that they were all in at least one, if not two classes together. And then that teacher would work with us on, making sure that they were getting those experiences that many of these other kids in the presidential scholars group and everything, they did on their own. They were motivated to do those
Right.
things. These kids maybe didn't have the wherewithal. Maybe they were introverts. Who knows why they didn't do those things? But we just tried to connect the dots with them, again, to get them ready for their careers, to really be able to go out confidently, and speak in an interview, and so on and so forth. So that was really also a phenomenal experience, to just be able to see the metamorphosis of those students who could have been, who knows what would have happened. They might have still been okay in their college experience, but it was all about, and again, this was heavily influenced by my president there. What she would ask me, what is a student experience? What is a student experience? And that was first and foremost. Is it good for kids? What is their experience? And so that's the mindset and the leading guiding light that, with every decision we made, it was all about what is it like to be a student here?
Right.
And how does it feel?
Exactly. The focus was always on the students, as it should.
Yeah.
Were success spas, you talk about success spas, were they a part of that initiative, or were they another initiative?
I would say it's all connected. The dots are connected. So the success spas were also a part of that, early alerts and intervention. But it kind of came about, again, we were really looking at our English scores, and we were wanting to increase the pass rates, the success rates of the students taking our English classes. So our first success spa was exactly that. It was literacy. It was a literacy spa. It was an awesome experience. The students loved it. But then what happened was our student government, you may or may not know, it became required that all students have to pass the civics literacy exam in the state of Florida. And so that first year, I think we had 800 or something students that they won't graduate unless they pass this, right? And the student government came to us and they said, we don't want to leave any of our classmates behind. How can we do this? So we were like, okay, let's apply this English SPA to the civics literacy exam. And so it was so funny. It was so successful with students passing that exam first time try. After doing that the college then wanted to adopt it at all other 7 campuses. They wanted to call it boot camp. And I was, in the Dean's Council at the time, I was like, you guys can call it boot camp at your campuses, but at our campus, it's going to be called the Success Spa, because they literally would come in and we would give them the spa menu. And it was very holistic. We would do 20 minutes of hard drilling, and then we would have yoga or, meditation or whatever. And we interspersed it. Yeah, it was awesome. And they loved it. The students absolutely loved it. So it was just kind of all interrelated at the same time. And, again, with the pandemic, and I have to say, that's the elephant in the room. We wanted reasons for them to want to be at the campus. Like, what is the added value of getting our students, and for that matter, our faculty, back into this building? Otherwise it's just a shell. And we wanted to offer all kinds of experiences for all of our community to be in that building. And that was just part of that conversation.
Outstanding. That's great. That's great. Well, we're at that point here in our podcast where I allow our guest an opportunity to provide our listeners with any final thoughts for them, Dr. Bice.
Well, I would just say always keep learning, keep discovering, keep an open mind. The older I get and the more educated I get, the more I know that I don't know. And that's what I absolutely am confident about. So I just keep learning. And I think also don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid of failing. Like, these proof of concepts are so great because you can start with a very small group of students or a group of teachers. And then if it works, then you scale it up. If it doesn't, well, what didn't work about it? And you constantly think of these things as experiments of sort, and never be afraid to try new things. And as long as it's not unethical, immoral, or illegal, why not? And so I just encourage everybody to keep an open mind and just always keep learning.
That's great. A license for innovation. You have obviously demonstrated throughout your career. Thank you again, Dr. Bice, for being our guest, and thank you to our listeners. For the Future Insight podcast, this is Dean Cantu, wishing you all the best. Until next time, take care.
Thank you.